Hey everybody, it's Emma Lightning, and as you can see, I'm in a different place. This is actually my house. Um, and because I'm at home for Thanksgiving break, which means I have a whole week to record, and the lighting is really bad right now because it's nighttime, so tomorrow is going to be like a day of recording, and that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so anyway, welcome to another PSA trope review, where I read over a selection of PSAs or PIFs listed on a particular TV tropes page, and then I give my thoughts on whether they belong on there or not. So do they? Let's find out. Today's trope that we're looking at is scare 'em straight, which is a very popular technique that PSAs use, so we have a lot of options. And for this episode, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently. This particular trope, it's kind of tricky to classify because everyone's experience with these ads is going to be unique. Some people might be scared of them, some people might not. And the same could be said for any PSA, really. So what I'm going to do this time is, rather than flat out saying whether I think they belong on the page, I'm just going to give them two different ratings on scales of 1 to 10. First will be the usual typical scare factor rating, and then second is what I guess we could call the straight factor, for lack of a better term, which is going to be me sort of gauging how effective the PSA was at conveying its message, making it stick, and getting people to take it seriously, which is very important. So pretty similar to my top 20 most effective PSAs list, which I will link in the description if you haven't seen it. So check it out if you're interested. And now, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's get scared. Now, like I said, there were a lot of ads on the page to choose from. The first one I've selected is Mr. Yuck. This one's pretty interesting to me because it's actually a PSA advertisement hybrid of sorts. It was promoting these little stickers with the titular Mr. Yuck on them, and they were meant to be placed on hazardous household products to signal that kids shouldn't touch them. And of course, a brightly colored face isn't usually enough to deter a kid from the wonders of cleaning products, so what they had to do in addition to them was use, of course, the TV to scare the shit out of kids, teaching them to associate the little stickers with this nightmare-inducing song.
Mr. Yuck is me. Mr. Yuck is green.
Did it work? I'm not sure. I wasn't around back then, but I can imagine it did, since this PS ad is still pretty noteworthy and creepy even today. So the scare factor for this one, it's a little hard to say because, like I said, this one was aimed more at kids. So as a 20-year-old, I'd give it a 6 out of 10 probably. But for the straight factor, I'd have to give it a 9 out of 10 because it's simple, it's clear with its point, and it tells you the consequences flat out. Unlike a certain other song about not eating things you shouldn't, which we will be discussing very soon in a future review special. So, traveling halfway around the globe for our second PSA, it is, I think it's Australia's AIDS Grim Reaper ad from the 80s. This is one that brings very unfortunate implications to the term scare them straight. If you don't know, like I said, this was made in the 80s when people were still very, let's say, ignorant about AIDS and where it comes from and how it's transferred. So rather than associating the Grim Reaper as a personification of the AIDS virus as it was meant to be, people kind of took it to represent the gays instead. At least that's what I've read. And I believe it. That's the kind of thing that people do. And it doesn't exactly help that they included this line.
At first, only gays and IV drug users were being killed by AIDS.
For the scare factor, I have to give it an 8 out of 10. The human bowling pin effect is a little bit narmy, but that last shot that shows all the Grim Reapers lined up, it's still pretty chilling. So for the straight factor, this one only gets a 5. It misses the mark by implying that AIDS is only worth talking about now that it's affecting straight, non-drug users. But AIDS itself is definitely something to fear, so they got that part right. It's tricky. It's a tricky subject. Our third one is a PIF, and it is I think it's Fire Kills made this one. It is the Chip Pans PIF. I actually remember being shown this in a middle school science class. I'm not sure if that's a false memory, but if it wasn't this, it was something very close to this. And as you can tell, it didn't really stick with me back then, and I'm not sure why. Because when I saw it a few years later, I think it was on one of Peachy's reviews, it definitely stuck in my brain a whole lot more. And fire safety PIFs in general have a habit of doing that. And I think this one stands out from the rest, and that's for two reasons. It actually shows a real-life survivor of a fire-related accident, and two, it actually does tell you how to prevent a grease fire from spreading in the first place, which is super important. But unfortunately, though, from what I've read, it is not entirely accurate. I'm not an expert, so don't quote me on this, but I have heard that running the cloth under the water and covering a pan is actually a bad idea, as if the cloth is too dry, the fire will just use it as fuel. But one thing's for sure, I can say that I will never ever be throwing water over a fire, ever. The scare factor for this one is a solid 6 out of 10. Seeing the fire go from 0 to 100 that fast is pretty jarring. And while it's not super graphic, seeing the lady's face at the end is kind of jarring too. Not much more I can say on that note. The straight factor, however, is an 8 out of 10 because, in my opinion, the effectivity of a PSA always shoots up when it features real people who are affected by whatever the issue is. And speaking of seeing PIFs in school, how many of you were forced to watch this or something along these lines in health class? I don't know about you, but it's thanks to ads like this that I can securely say that I will never ever be touching tobacco or cigarettes. Of course, there are dozens of anti-smoking PSAs and PIFs with a range of imagery and anecdotes and statistics to scare the shit out of you. And I could have chosen from any of them, but this is the specific one that was on the TV Tropes page. But who knows? Perhaps there's an anti-smoking PSA review in our future. Anyway, this one's gross. I think that goes without saying. But it is pretty fascinating too, I have to say. Maybe it's just me, but I'm always more prone to pay attention to that extra squick factor thrown in smoking PSAs, like the other one that has the tar on the lungs. The thought of having this stuff actually in your body is pretty horrifying, but seeing it being visually represented in front of you just kind of ups the ante for me in terms of interest. The scare factor, just due to the graphic nature of it, I will give it a 7 out of 10. Like I said, it's more the idea of this happening that makes it scary, but if you are particularly squeamish, this one might get you pretty bad. And for the straight factor, I have to give it a 10 out of 10. I am cheating a little. I'm going to go ahead and rate smoking PSAs in the here's what's literally happening to your body category as a whole. So as a genre, that gets a 10 out of 10. What can I say? They do their job too well. We got quite an infamous PIF up next. This is the DOE's Shame ad. And it features yet another song that PIFs have ruined forever, along with How Much Is That Doggy and Sweet Child of Mine. So here's a possibly unpopular opinion from me. I may have mentioned this once in a review in the past, I don't remember, but this one does nothing for me. I don't like it at all. And it's not just because it's shocking or sad or whatever. I just think it's over the top and tasteless. Everyone talks about the sequel with the Classroom of Kids, and I think the general consensus on that one is that it's not good. But in my opinion, this one isn't much better at all. It seems very, very forced. Very staged, very contrived. So I guess I can believe that a drunk driver might crash through somebody's fence, but flipping the car over literally on top of the kid, it's almost cartoonish. And the fact that the kid is wearing the same soccer uniform and everything, it just makes it all the more forced. And I just think it was the wrong approach. Like I said, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I really do feel like this one is too contrived to be as scary as people claim it is. But as far as the scare factor, guess I have to give it a 9 out of 10, even though it doesn't scare me personally, but it is pretty shocking and horrible, which is the point. The straight factor, though, I'd have to give it a 6 out of 10, and that's me being generous. I don't think it ever made anybody stop and think, wait, I shouldn't drink and drive, because I might kill a small child in a very conveniently placed crash. I just don't think that happened. Last but certainly not least, we're heading back over to America, to our favorite partnership for a drug-free America for the ad Snake. This is one I think most of us will know. I can actually recite this one by heart, pretty much. It's just got such a rhythm to it, and it sticks in my head like it's a song, kind of. Honestly, though, this is just an absolute staple of 80s drug PSAs. In my head, I would imagine that Snake is probably friends with the puppet drug dealer from the CCA Hip Choice ad, and they both hang out with the meth cleaner girl and the very honest drug dealer from the Meth Project's Everything Else ad. And I'm going to stop now before I start creating a PSA cinematic universe, which would be amazing, don't get me wrong, but I feel like that's a whole nother video. Anyway, this one just reeks of the 80s, but, you know, in a good way. Much like the I Learned It By Watching You ad, it's vintage charm, but obviously this one's much scarier. Although the effects are a little outdated, but I would be lying if I said I didn't see why this scared the shit out of so many kids back then, supposedly. And hey, once again, he's pretty upfront about his intentions, so good for you, Snake, I guess. Scare factor, though, 8 out of 10. You're creepy. Enough said. The straight factor, interestingly enough, I'd have to give this one a 5, and most of that is just due to the scare factor alone. The drug PSAs are really, really tricky because they're hard to take seriously because a lot of them don't even address the subject of drugs directly. So I doubt that this alone actually influenced anybody to steer clear of drugs. But I can't imagine kids hiding under their beds in fear of this one, which is usually a place where you won't find many drugs, so hey, maybe it worked indirectly. And that concludes my review of a few PSAs from the Scare 'em Straight TV Tropes page. As I've mentioned before, I love doing these TV Tropes reviews, and like I said in this review, there were so many others, and I'd be happy to do like a follow-up for this one, a part 2. So let me know if you want to see that. Like I said, I'm going to be recording a lot this week, so send in your requests, and I do have a couple of collaborations coming up with some surprise guests. So look forward to that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!